In the news today, it appears that Kathleen Kennedy, famed Uber producer who has ushered in such a startling era of failures for Disney Star Wars that some, namely yours truly, have opted to title her reign of terror Star Wars, the Kennedy Assassination Years, has been lobbying the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to bestow upon her fellow denizen of artistic destruction, Robert A. Iger, or old Uncle Bobby of the IP hoarding, content milling, creativity crushing fame, an honorary award for most IPs run shamelessly into the ground. The Academy Awards is a group of nitwits who have their heads so firmly placed up their bums that they presented a man with one of their highest awards mere hours after physically assaulting another man on national television, and even they gave KK the old stank eye. You know your bullshit is rank when even the Academy can smell it. When asked for comment on why Bobby Blockhead was getting the side eye from a group of people who only matter to themselves, one half-drunk hillbilly skag grabbed my microphone and sputtered, "Because it's like Satan trying to nominate Cthulhu for a humanitarian award." It likely didn't help KK's case that she was mumbling the lyrics to Nine Inch Nails' The Great Destroyer as she was traipsing about, foraging for votes. So it seems like we can't get through a week without somebody at Disney saying or doing something incredibly stupid. This week, it was Kathleen Kennedy's turn. Among the bevy of sins Disney has committed over the last several years, one that personally agitates me is that they've turned the word adaptation into something dirty. And a lot of people have a negative impression of it because of them. But realistically, adaptation has been a part of the film industry since its inception. So if we go all the way back, thinking about films like Gone with the Wind, or Oliver Twist, or Breakfast at Tiffany's, or even the film that shall not be named, the very first non-serial American 12-reel film, Birth of a Nation. That was an adaptation. However, the current era of adaptations feels very different, and I think there are two important questions we can ask to kind of potentially get at one reason that they feel that way. Why and how? Meaning, why are they adapting it, and how are they adapting it? So let's deal with the why first. One potential aspect to kind of dissect this question is something that we look at in qualitative research, and a question that a lot of qualitative researchers ask themselves before launching into a project. And the question is, why this here? Why this now? Now, the reason that we ask ourselves that question is so that we're emphasizing the importance of the context, the timing, and the specific social and cultural context that the research is being done in, to ensure that the research is relevant, meaningful, and can contribute something significant. In our case now with film, we would be looking at when a film is released or when an adaptation is released, it's why is this happening here and why do we need this now? So what is the context? What is the timing? How is this going to contribute? How is this going to be unique? How is it going to give us something significant that the previous film didn't? A good example of this would be Snow White. Now, not the disaster back from March of 2025, but the original Snow White, the animated one from 1937. That was the very first animated feature film produced in the United States. It was also the first cell animated film. Now, another thing to look at is that released in 1937. The United States at that point was 8 years into the Great Depression. And we were also about 2 years away from the outbreak of World War II. Now, with that context in mind, let's look at Walt Disney's comments about 1, the casting of Snow White, and then 2, the kind of purpose behind animation and the way that animation is meant to be done. So first, the casting of Snow White. I wanted to get a voice for Snow White that would be kind of away from every day, kind of off in another world. Now, his comments about animation. The first duty of the cartoon is not to picture or duplicate real action or things as they actually happen, but to give a caricature of life and action. To picture on the screen things that have run through the imagination of the audience to bring to life dream fantasies and imaginative fantasies that we have all thought of during our lives or have pictured to us in various forms during our lives. Can you imagine then why this film was released when it was released? During a time in the Great Depression when a lot of people were struggling with a lot of different things, you have this film that is purposefully made to take you away from that. It is escapist. I think it makes sense timing-wise. Why was this made? Why was this made then? Why was it made in that context? Makes sense. And you can see why it was successful.
Now let's think about something like the Aladdin live-action adaptation. What was the context of that film? Well, it was released 9 years after the live-action Alice in Wonderland film. In between that time, meaning in between the 2010 live-action adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, there had been 7 other live-action adaptations. Namely, The Sorcerer's Apprentice, Maleficent, Cinderella, The Jungle Book, Through the Looking Glass, so the second Alice in Wonderland film, Christopher Robin, Dumbo, and then Aladdin. The question then becomes, with all of those films, and Aladdin as well, why do we need this here? Why do we need this now? In the end, the answer is always going to come back to money. Easy money. It's a simple way to make money. We don't have to be creative. We don't have to think. We don't have to make something new. We can just take something that we already know works. We already know it has a fan base. We already know people love it. And we already know how the story goes. So we can basically just reprint the story, change around a few bits to make it look like we're not just straight up copying our homework, and money. It's easy. Now, the other thing that gets thrown in there are 2 other potential arguments, and I want to address both. One is the updating. There is a dirty word that gets thrown around a lot now in current culture, and a lot of different YouTubers have talked about this, the idea of updating a film for the modern audience. If films were genuinely interested in updating films for a modern audience, why don't they go touch like The Godfather or Casablanca or Gone with the Wind or a lot of other things that are considered classics? Because it isn't really about updating something for a modern audience. They can only update the things that are loved enough that they can have a built-in audience, but not loved so much that people are going to be highly offended at the insinuation that there was ever something wrong with the original. And realistically, the biggest thing that dirty little lie is actually hiding is that it allows them to virtue signal in a way that it makes what they're actually doing not look like what they're doing. Meaning, Disney remade Aladdin not because they wanted to update it for a modern audience. Disney remade Aladdin because they knew they were going to make a lot of money off of it. Now, if they virtue signal on top of it, then it makes it look less like a money-grubbing move to the people that actually care about that particular narrative. A second potential reason is one that's even more frustrating to me, and it is the false belief in this concept of high art versus low art. And this is, again, existed since the beginning of film. At the beginning of film, books were considered high art, and films were considered low art. Now, in the current culture, films are considered high art, and animation is considered the low art. Thus, one argument that gets thrown out is that by taking Aladdin or The Lion King and turning them into live action, well, The Lion King is a complete fallacy. We're just going to throw that one right out the window. So we'll just focus on Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast. If we shift these into live action, we are increasing their value because we are turning them from the low art into the high art. The argument breaks down when you start to compare other things. So when you think about, okay, take Deadpool and Wolverine. That movie made $1 billion. Okay, or something like John Wick. That's incredibly popular. They've made a whole bunch of movies out of it. Now, compare those to something like WALL-E or Spirited Away. Which one's the high art? I think it would be amusing for me personally to watch somebody try to argue that Deadpool and Wolverine or John Wick should be considered high art because they've got people in them, whereas Spirited Away and WALL-E should be considered low art because they're made out of pictures. This ties into a whole idea where animation has been systematically devalued into a child's medium of storytelling, and that's something that I strongly disagree with. I think in a lot of ways the narratives in animation are much tighter and have to be more considered, particularly the hand-drawn animations, because they really have to think about, do we need this? Do we need this here? Why? Because it's going to take an incredible amount of time to produce this thing. Whereas in the live action films, they can just take after take after take, and they can kind of piece things together, and they can use all these quick edits, and they can use the CG labs, and they can use all this stuff to kind of cover it up. I mean, think about it. It used to be that films were all about 90 minutes, but now films are all generally about 120 minutes. There's an extra 30 minutes of our time that almost every film is taking. Why? It's not because these films are so well written and so tightly written that they needed every single one of those minutes. A lot of times there's a bunch of extraneous crap that they could have cut out. And that was one thing that animation was really good at. They didn't waste your time. And trying to argue that it is child's entertainment, again, go back to many of the things that Walt Disney talked about. It's not about child's entertainment. And I'll try to go dig up one of his quotes and throw it up here to kind of go along with this. But the idea is it was never meant to be just about telling stories to children. And anybody that tries to reduce this down to animation is meant to be for children, that stories are meant to be juvenile, and that live action is a higher form of art, I'm sorry, you're wrong.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong.
So, moving these films into live action kind of ends up accomplishing a couple goals. One, it makes money. Two, they can try to pretend like they're making a more serious or adult film. Three, it allows them to push social messages into things in order to kind of glaze over the fact that the reality is all they're trying to do is kind of reuse something to make money off it again. So that covers the why. Now let's move into the how. So the how kind of goes into two potential roads, strict and loose. The strict path is basically trying to create a one-to-one copy of the thing. Contrary to popular belief, the strict path is not the one that you want. Why? Well, particularly if you're moving from a book to a film, it's almost impossible. There are just certain things that you can do in a book medium that you can't do in a film medium. The same thing applies moving from animation to live action. If we think back to what Walt Disney was talking about and the way that he approached animation, it should be obvious. He wasn't trying to make real things move and act and do things like real things do them. He was trying to create fantasy worlds where you can imagine the thing, but the thing doesn't act in exactly in the way that the thing is supposed to work, but in a way that you could imagine it working. Thus, we can't do that with live action things. We have to turn it back into reality. So you're never going to get a strict one-to-one copy. The second road is the loose road, where you're trying to keep the kind of spirit of the thing, but you're changing things around to kind of fit what it is you want to do. Both of these end up with an inherent question, particularly if you're going from a film to a film or an animation to a film. If you're going to create a strict one-to-one copy, why do you need the other one? If you're going to go with the loose adaptation, the question then becomes, why not just make a different story? Why copy it if you're going to play so loose with what the film was trying to do the first time? So if strict and loose are not really the answer, what is the main thing that we should be focusing on? So in my opinion, when we're changing things, I think the primary question should be this. How do the changes that you're making fundamentally impact the four pillars of storytelling, namely characters, plot, theme, and world building? So in other words, what really matters is not how close one thing is to the other in action, but in how close it is to representing who the characters are, the world that they live in, their journey through that world, and then what that journey represents on a deeper thematic level. So having said that, I want to investigate the how step in particular for one of the Disney live action remakes, Aladdin. And in this analysis, I'm only going to be focusing on the resolution of that movie. Keep in mind, there are a lot of things that get altered in that movie. There's a lot of different changes that may get made. So I'm trying to focus on one particular section of the movie to show you how these four things can all be impacted by the changes that Disney makes when they switch things over into live action.
That's a good move. I can't believe it. I'm losing to a rug.
Now, before I get going, I do want to clarify there is some confusion. Some people like to use different words when they're talking about remake or adaptation, and kind of they end up sort of getting used interchangeably, and I want to explain at least my definition of them. In my mind, a remake is when you're transferring something that was basically in that medium into that medium again. So for example, we can look at the evolution of Total Recall. The first Total Recall film in the 90s with Arnold Schwarzenegger was an adaptation. They were adapting a book into a film. The second time they made it, the one that they did with Colin Farrell, that absolute piece of crap, that was a remake. Why? It was the same medium. They were remaking the story, just changing bits around. But it wasn't adapting it into a new form. It was basically film to film. To me, that's a remake. Now, with something like Aladdin, I consider that an adaptation because it's moving from animation to live action. So the types of changes that they're making and the things that they're moving around, they're having to adapt to them. So, the live action Aladdin adaptation. First off, this was one of the few films, especially with the Renaissance films. So we've got the five kind of big Renaissance films that come to mind when I think of this. We've got Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Little Mermaid, and Mulan. The funny thing with Beauty and the Beast is they got an actress that can act but can't sing. With this, they finally hit the mark. They had an actress that can act and she can sing. It was one of the few times they got it right. Then they get to the Lion King, got a singer that can't act but can sing. Little Mermaid, same problem. Singer that can sing, can't act. Then you get into Mulan, an actress that can't do anything. Anyways, I think it's kind of funny that the path that they've taken and the struggles that they've had trying to get the right actress. But Aladdin, the one piece of praise that I can give them is Naomi Scott was good. She was good. Sadly, that's where the praise ends. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through 3 parts of the resolution of Aladdin. And we're going to look at what happened in the animation. And then we're going to look at what happened in the live action, how those things changed, and how those changes impact the 4 pillars of storytelling. Starting with the first scene in the animation that we're going to look at. We're going to look at the moment right after the genie boots Jafar off to the Cave of Wonders and Aladdin and Jasmine have a conversation. So let's take a look at that.
Jasmine, I'm sorry I lied to you about being a prince.
I know why you did.
Well, I guess this is goodbye.
Oh, that stupid law. This isn't fair. I love you.
Now, the things to notice here is that Aladdin immediately apologizes, and he apologizes specifically for what he did, which was lying. Jasmine immediately acknowledges that she understands why he lied, forgives him for lying, and then we have a little bit more of a conversation and she says, I love you. Okay, now let's look at the live action version.
Wait. How can I ever thank you?
Oh, no, you don't need to thank me. But I hope you accept my apology. I'm sorry. To the both of you. Especially you. You deserve so much.
We all make mistakes.
Aladdin?
I hope you find what you're looking for.
So now Aladdin's apologizing, but we don't know specifically for what. He's kind of apologizing just for existing. He's apologizing for a whole bevy of things. He's got a lot to apologize for. And notice how it wasn't Jasmine that forgave him. It was the Sultan, the dad. The dad forgave him. Jasmine's entire contribution to this whole exchange was Aladdin. That was it. That's all she had to say. Aladdin. Done. Okay. Moving on to the next scene. Now we're going to look at the moment when Aladdin is making his choice of what he's going to be doing with his final wish. So let's take a look at that.
Jasmine, I do love you, but I gotta stop pretending to be something I'm not.
I understand.
Now, what I think is important to note in this scene is that Aladdin and Jasmine are here. Jasmine understands that Aladdin had a choice, that there was something going on here where he could have chosen to become a prince again. But he says to her, I don't want to live a lie. I do love you and I want to be with you. You are the thing that I want most, but I don't want to get it dishonestly. I can't do that. And again, Jasmine says, I understand. So she understands the sacrifice he's making and why he's making it. He then makes the final wish. Okay, now let's look at the live action version.
Okay. Last wish. Genie,
I'm ready. Hold on. Here we go.
I wish.
Third and final wish.
I wish to set you free.
Don't know if you caught this or not, but Jasmine's not even in the conversation. Why? Because Jasmine's off with the Sultan, her dad, having a different conversation. Whatever people want to say about this film, there is no guarantee that Jasmine heard or understood any part of the conversation that's going on between Aladdin and the genie. Thus, she has no idea what choice he's making, why he's making it, or she understands nothing as far as we're concerned. The only indication that she's even aware of what's going on is as soon as the genie starts to transition into the regular Will Smith, she looks that way because there's magic happening. So the magic starts to happen and they show her face turning that way. But we don't know if she heard any part of the conversation. Finally, we have the scene where the Sultan is presenting the choice or making the change, the thing, the decision that the Sultan makes that finally allows the kind of ending to happen. So let's watch the animated version.
That's right. You've certainly proven your worth as far as I'm concerned. It's that law that's the problem.
Father?
Well, am I Sultan or am I Sultan? From this day forth, the princess shall marry whoever she deems worthy.
Him. I choose you, Aladdin.
Call me Al.
Now, notice in this version, obviously the Sultan is freeing Jasmine to choose whoever she wants. She immediately, with great elation, runs directly over to Aladdin and says, "You, I choose you." And then, notice, and I know this is a small, silly detail, she says his name. "I choose you, Aladdin." And he says, "Call me Al." Okay. Now, let's look at the live action version.
You shall be the next Sultan.
As Sultan, you may change the law.
He is a good man.
Where'd he go?
Stop, thief! Your sultan commands it.
Is that the princess?
Sultan. Does that mean I'm in trouble?
Only because you got caught.
Okay, this is a bit tricky because it's not even really there, because now the choice is not you may choose whoever you want to marry. The choice is now, well, I'm going to make you Sultan and you can do whatever you want. Here's the problem. Aladdin's not even there. We don't know at what point he pieced out of that conversation. He's just gone. And realistically, when you see the reaction when he says to her, "Oh, Sultan," he has no idea what they were talking about. And he had to get all the way out of the palace at that point anyway. So yeah, he wasn't even part of this conversation. And this is the point. Jasmine cared so much more about that whole thing and everything that was going on. She didn't even notice he left. The genie didn't notice he left. The handmaiden didn't notice he left. Nobody noticed he left. Why? Because nobody in this movie cares about Aladdin. He doesn't really matter. It's fine if he leaves. Nobody's really paying attention to him. Why? Everyone's attention is on Jasmine. She is now the hero of this story. Even though the movie is called Aladdin. It's Aladdin's movie, but it's not his movie anymore. Then we get the extra insulting thing where instead of going up and saying, "Aladdin, wait, please stop," and having any kind of affection or kindness or anything in her voice, he left because he was feeling whatever he was feeling. He was being very emo. I hate using this word. It's a very internet-y thing, but it's like he was like super beta male energy. It was just sort of like, well, I guess the genie's not gonna be my friend anymore and I can't marry the girl, so I'll just go walk outside and look at her comb and be super sad, bro. But instead of at least approaching him with some type of affection, what does she do? "Stop, thief." Ha 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 ha. So funny. No, it's not. It's condescending, and I get it. Jasmine in the original too was a bit snarky and she was funny and quippy, and that's fine. This is not the time. And then it goes, "Stop, thief. Your sultan demands it." This is her throwing around the thing that was more important to her. She was more worried about becoming the sultan, and now she's got it. If I were Aladdin in that point, and actually what I felt in that point, I was like, dude, keep walking, keep going. You do not want to turn around and be part of that woman's life, because she is going to torture you forever.
This is the famous Dead Sea Tupperware. Listen. Still good.
So that gets us to the end of the scene analysis. Let's talk about how each part of this impacted the story. So starting with the plot. So what changes do we have? So number 1, Aladdin doesn't say what he's apologizing for. 2, Jasmine doesn't acknowledge understanding of his lie. 3. Jasmine doesn't say she loves Aladdin anywhere in the scene. 4. Aladdin's final wish and the dialogue here was away from Jasmine and her father. 5. Genie has an unnecessary romance story added in. 6. The Sultan doesn't change the law, he makes Jasmine Sultan and tells her she can change the law. Finally, Aladdin walks out and Jasmine has to go out after him. So that's a lot of plot changes. That is a lot of functional changes, and each one of those things are going to infect the other 3 pillars of storytelling. So let's start with the characters. How does this impact the characters? Well, first of all, we need to think about Jasmine's motivation. Jasmine's motivation in the animated film was personal freedom. She wanted the freedom to make her own choices. She wanted the freedom to live her own life, to do what she wanted. In the live action, her primary motivation is to become Sultan. That is the thing that she wants most. However much the love story with Aladdin might still be there, her primary goal, the main thing she wants, is power. The power to be the Sultan, to take care of the people. And you can say it's for a good reason. You can try to say, well, she wants to be queen, or she wants to be Sultan, or she wants to be the ruler because she wants to do good things and she wants to help people. But nevertheless, the quest is for power now. The quest is for that position. The quest is for that role. That's the thing that she's after. Thus, however else you want to cut this, her relationship and her love for Aladdin is second to that. It is not primary to that. It is not above it. It is below it. It is a thing that exists after the main thing that she wants most. And again, that's why she's not in the conversation with Aladdin about the choice he's making, because she needs to be in a conversation with her father about the decision her father's making, because we need to change that decision. Thus, we need to change the importance of the scene, and we need to change who is the focus there. Now we have how this impacts Aladdin. Aladdin is no longer the main character in his own story. And he's not really the diamond in the rough anymore, because neither the father nor Jasmine were there to acknowledge the thing that would have finally completed the loop of that story. Now, in terms of world building, there weren't any major issues within this part, save for the whole thing about the genie becoming a person and then getting into a relationship with the handmaiden, and then he's telling the story at the beginning. It's all a bunch of silly stuff that annoys me, but less so than the rest of the things. So finally, let's talk about the themes. So there are kind of 4 big themes that I want to focus on. So we've got self-discovery, the value of inner worth, and then we have the dangers of deception and superficiality. So the 3 and 4 kind of go together. Nearly all of these are damaged by the changes they made in this film. So how does this affect Jasmine? She's not self-discovering. This isn't, even if you're looking at her song that they add into this, she doesn't want to be voiceless. She's not trying to self-discover. She's not trying to understand something about herself or discover something about herself. She's trying to break through the bonds of the oppression of all the people that are trying to hold her back. And particularly, as we all know, it's the patriarchy. The patriarchy is what has led to her oppression. Thus, her motivation and her whole push through the film, and again, the song and all the things that she's trying to do, that's what it is. It's not about her discovering something about herself. It's about her breaking through those bonds. So that has been altered. Aladdin's self-discovery is similar at the beginning, but again, the moment of his true self-discovery, the moment that also goes into the next theme, which is about inner worth, isn't appreciated by the 2 people that needed to appreciate it most. His journey of self-discovery brought him to the reality that he loved Jasmine. He wanted to be part of this palace world, a part of the rich world, and part of all of that stuff, and like he thought that that was going to be a nicer world, and that being poor meant that he was less than, that people were looking down to him, and he wanted people to see that there was more to him than that. Thus, the choice he makes with the genie, where he says, like, yeah, I could become a prince, but I would be lying again, and I don't want to lie to you again. I don't want to lie to Jasmine again, because that's what got me here in the first place. I can't live this lie. I do love you, but I can't live a lie. And that was the end of his self-discovery story, and that's also the end and kind of the most shining moment of his inner worth, the whole diamond in the rough thing, and both the Sultan and Jasmine needed to hear and appreciate that because it was important. It was an important part of the theme, and they both missed it. Sure, the audience gets it in this film. The audience gets to see it, but the audience are not the important ones to understand that. The people that needed to understand it were the other characters. But again, because they've shifted focus to Jasmine becoming the Sultan, nobody else gets to hear it. Finally, superficiality, the dangers of superficiality. And this was the whole thing that Aladdin came to understand. He saw the palace as this beautiful, wonderful place where people were, had all this money and had a perfect life. And that was the goal. He had this superficial goal to get there, but then along the way, he realized that that wasn't the real goal, that wasn't a good goal to have. The goal became, no, I love this girl. This girl is the one that I want. It's not that thing. I don't want all the riches and I don't want all the stuff. And actually, when it came down to, you're going to be Sultan, that's when he panicked. Now think about this. What is more superficial then? The pursuit of personal freedom or the pursuit of power? Again, I know a lot of people are probably going to get angry going, that's not what Jasmine was after. She was after affirmation, and she was after that. You're going to have a bunch of fancy words for it. At the end of the day, she wanted to be Sultan. She wanted to be the ruler. Thus, again, all of the themes were damaged in some way by the changes that they made to this film. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, and I want to reiterate, I think the two main things that I talked about are a good way to look at the way that things are adapted now, or remade now, or turned into sequels. Why this here? Why this now? What is the timing of this? What is the context of this? Does this version of this new story or this sequel to this thing give us something significant, something worthwhile? Is it telling an important story? Does it have something good to do? Is there something that it's adding that's worth keeping? Is there something relevant or meaningful or unique about this? And if we look at all of the Disney adaptations, the answer to that is no. But then the second thing to think about is how they are altering them often alters who these characters are, the world that they live in, the path and the journey that they take through that world, and then what that journey actually represents on a thematic level. So in short, every small change they make can massively alter the story, often for ill, and these changes exist in almost every single Disney live action adaptation. The question then becomes, why did they stop telling new stories? Why don't they just make a different story? If they want a story with the Jasmine from the live action, why not make a new film? And the reason is money. And realistically, this problem is not isolated to Disney. I mean, think about in recent years, we've had RoboCop, Total Recall, The Crow, Father of the Bride, West Side Story, The Karate Kid, Clash of the Titans, The Great Gatsby, Planet of the Apes. This list could go on, and all of these should be considered with these same two questions in mind. Why? Why this here? Why are we redoing this? What is the context of redoing this? What is the purpose of redoing this? Does this add something significant? Does this improve something significant? Or is it ultimately insulting the previous version, trying to pretend like they're making it better, they're updating it, they're upgrading it, they're making something good out of something that was lesser for some reason? And then also think about how it was made. And again, how, when they go into making it, how does it alter the characters? How does it alter the plot? How does it alter the themes? And how does it alter the world building? And then think about if the story then is the same thing, and if it's not, why didn't they just make a different story? So anyways, those are my thoughts. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch you in the next one.